Hello and welcome to your next tutorial in C++. Today, we're going to learn how to pass the vectors as parameters into functions. So, don't forget to include our vector class, the library that houses all the predefined functions and whatnot. And let's get started. So there's going to be 5 functions I'm going to be making in this tutorial, but I only require you to stay for 2, even though I encourage you to stay for all of them. The 2 that I require are the fill vector, so you know how to fill a vector, and the print, so that you can see the passing in as a parameter in action. The other 3 I'm going to do is the reverse, which will print the elements in the vector in reverse order. The next one will be print evens, which will only print the even numbers in the vector. And the last one's the replace, which will prompt the user for 2 integers. One integer will cause the application to look for all those instances of that integer in the vector and then replace it with the other one they typed in. So that's all. So first of all, let's create our first vector. So I'll call it vector int my vector, and that's it. So let's create our first function for the fill vector. So in order to pass in a vector as a parameter, all you do is type out vector int. So that's pretty easy. So it's kind of like everything else. With a regular variable, you just type out the data type. With arrays, you just type out the data type with the whatever you call them. And the vectors, these guys. So the brackets, that's what I was thinking of. Basically, it's always everything except for the name. So that's all you have to really worry about. Except for down here in the definitions, we will be using the name. So here it's called fill vector. Then down here we type out @param vector int. Now there's something I really need to discuss with you. And remember how arrays are always passed by reference by default? Well, vectors are not. And if we're going to be filling it up with stuff, we're going to need to pass it by reference. So all you do is add an ampersand. Now there's something that's very important I need to discuss with you on top of that, and that's the fact that you should always pass your vectors in by reference. And the reason for this is that vectors are very large in memory, very large size in memory. So remember, if you're passing it in by value, then every time you go in that function, you're going to be making a duplicate, which is going to take up all this massive space. So even if you don't plan to make changes to it, still pass it in by reference. I mean, arrays are always passed in by reference, so why not? Now, if you want to keep it from being tampered with in functions that aren't meant to do any changes to it, throw a const modifier in front of it, and that'll solve all your problems. But here, in the fill vector, we do want to modify it, so we're not going to use the const for this one. But we will for quite a few of the others. So the vector to be filled, and, well, let's go down here and actually implement the code. So it's void fill vector, and we're going to type in vector int, and it's by reference, and I'll call it new my vector. So I don't know what's going on here. I turn my numcaps, whatever you call it, the caps lock on. Okay, so now we have our fill vector, and we're passing in our vector as a parameter. And this time we don't have to worry about a num of elements, because as we learned in the last tutorial, the pushback function automatically resizes the vector, so we don't have to worry about passing in the num of elements to use it in our loop. So the first thing we'll have is a print message, and we'll have it say type in a list of numbers, and -1 to stop. Man, I'm getting really tired. It's really late right now, sorry about this. And then I have to create an in called inputs, and then cin input. Then we're going to go through our while loop. So we'll have a while loop, and basically it's while inputs is not equal to -1. So pretty simple. So while it's not equal to -1, and again, we don't have to worry about any kind of num of elements or anything like that. So then we're going to go new my vector dot push back, and then whatever we typed in as input. And then below this, we'll throw in the cin again, and that's it. And at the bottom, Just to make sure everything comes out nicely, I'll throw in an end line. So that's it with that. So let's do our print now. So void, void print vector, and it's basically our vector again. And just to save memory, we'll pass it by reference. But this time, since we're not going to be making any changes to our vector, where all we're going to do is printing the values, we can pass it in as a constant. So that's what we're going to do, and you should definitely do that. So print vector and at param vector int, and it's actually constant, sorry about that, and by reference as well, and the vector to be printed. I'm just making this up as I go. So let's go back down here and actually implement that function as well. So void print vector. So then in here we'll go const vector int by reference, and I'll still call it new my vector. I mean, why not? So then here we're going to have our actual for loop, our trusty little for loop here. So it's going to be an unsigned int, I is equal to 0, while I is less than new my vector dot size, and then I plus plus, and then new my vector, there we go, and then we'll actually print it out here, and that's not what I want. I want new my vector at I. There we go. So, and I'll actually want it to say vector right here, so that all the numbers will, come out right next to it. So that's all it's going to do, and I should have an extra end line there. So click save, and let's see this thing work. So before we can get it to work, we need to actually call those functions. So fill vector, and we're going to pass in my vector as the parameter. Remember, nothing special. In order to pass anything in as a parameter, all you do is just type the name, or at least in the main function. It's all you do. It's very simple. Then print vector, and well, we're going to throw in my vector again, my vector right here. So I click save, and let's run this. There we go. So I go, just type in whatever. -1 to stop, right? So -1's the last one. And there we go, 6 all the way to 5. So we went 6 all the way to 5. So all of them were printed. So that's really, really good. Really, really cool too. So a lot easier to work with than arrays, but oh well. And I think that was about it. So I told you when to use a constant modifier if you don't plan to make any changes. Always pass them by reference. Arrays are too, so why not? It will save memory. It's a very good thing, and that's about all I wanted to show you. So you can stop here, and I'm going to continue with some other functions that you might find useful. So the next one I want to do is the print reverse. So I'm going to go void reverse, and again, we're not going to be making any changes. All we're going to do is print the elements. So we're going to print our vector again, and at param const vector int and vector to be printed backwards. There we go, something like that. So let's go back all the way down here and implement the code. So I'll go void reverse, and then we're gonna have to pass that guy in. So const vector int by reference, and then I'll call it new my vector again, as usual, and that's going to be capitalized. There we go. And this time I'll have it say cout, and I'll have it say vector backwards, or how about this, reversed? That might be more technically correct. And then a for, and then a cout and line just to make it look nice. Then we'll have an unsigned int I is equal to, oh wait a minute, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, so I didn't want to set it equal to 0 because I want us to think about this. So we're making this function that's going to print all the elements backwards, which means we're going to have to start at the end, right? So are we going to set I equal to 0 here? No, what we're going to want to do is actually set it to new my vector dot size. And then, while I is greater than 0, and then we'll be decrementing I from there. Now inside this, we'll actually print all the elements then. So cout new my vector, and I'll set that equal to I, and there we go. Now there's actually something wrong with my code here, and I already know what it is. Notice how I set I equal to that size. Well, if you might have remembered, if the size is always 1 greater than the highest subscript, the very last element in an array or a vector is always 1 lower than the size, because indices always start at 0, so the last one will be, 1 lower, because it didn't start at 1. So, would it work if I put -1 here? Let's look at this. Let me throw reverse at the bottom. And type in my vector. To my knowledge, this shouldn't work. And 6, -1, and we went 36373. 36373 didn't print the last one. So I can't quite remember why this didn't work. Where was it? Here it is. So it's going to start at the size -1, but it never gets to the very last one. It never gets the opportunity to look at I equals to 0, because, well, it's always I is greater than 0. So the very last one it's going to read is when I is equal to 1. So an alternative way to do this, actually, to solve this problem, is to let it be the size, but in here, have it always look at the one, below it. So I'll click save, and this should actually solve the problem. So I'll go all these different numbers, -1, and there you go, 6384645. 6384645. So, I read that one backwards, but oh well, it's the same thing. So there you go, now the vector reversed worked. So, yay, we made a cool little function here that, prints everything backwards. That's really cool. So what's the next one I want to do? The print evens? Ooh, this would be a good one, actually. Void print evens. If you're still with me, I'm really happy you are, so I know that some of these will actually help you figure out some problems. So we're not going to be modifying the function, so it's going to be passing in the vector as a constant. And print evens only prints even numbers in vector. And so at param, and I'll just copy this. I'll copy this, because that's more correct. I'll copy this. Copy this, and I know I have to throw the const first. There we go. So save the vector to be printed. I don't know. Nah, I'm too lazy with that. I'm just gonna leave it as is. I'll go back down here and let's do the same thing now. So void print evens, and I'll throw in a const, and that's going to be the vector as an integer, by reference new my vector. So there we go. So now we have our new my vector in here again. So let's do a for loop to, well, print the even numbers. So the for loop will be the same. While I is less than new my vector dot size and I plus plus. So all that should work. And so how do we go about printing the evens? Well, what's the difference between odd numbers and even numbers? Well, even numbers can be divided by 2, right? So whether you're doing a print even or print odd, you can actually use an if statement like this. Is it true that if you were to divide either, let's just stick with even numbers. If we were to divide an even number by 2, it'll still be a whole number, right? It's not going to be a decimal. It can't be a decimal. So that means if we would try to look for the remainder, so in here, if we go new my vector, and then at I, and then go mod 2, what that's going to do is look for the remainder if it's divided by 2. If it's equal to 0, then it must be even. If it's 5, then it must be odd. So we'll look to see if it comes out to be 0. If it does, then cout, then new my vector at I. So all that should work, and I forgot my little message I would like first. So I have it say evens. And the difference between this and odds, when it comes to odds, all you have to do is this. Make it not equal. Then that will do the odds. But I want it to be equal, so I want all the evens to be printed. Then down here, I have another cout end line. So let's see how this one will work. So, first of all, I need to actually call it, so print evens. I go down here, and I need to pass in my vector. And let's see how this one will work. So I'll just type in a bunch of stuff. -1. And now let's look at this. So the first even number is 6. There it is. The next one is 2. There it is. The next one's 6. And then 4. So only the evens were printed, so it worked. So now the last one I'm going to show you is the replace, and probably the most difficult one. So this is going to be a void called replace. And all we're going to do is pass in our vector. But since basically what this one's going to do is it's going to prompt the user for 2 integers. One will be the old. Basically it's going to search for that integer throughout the vector, and when it does find that integer, each time it finds it, it's going to replace it with the second integer that you typed in. So that's the replace. So since we're changing the value of the vector, we're going to want to not pass this in as a constant, but obviously still by reference. This time we have to do it by reference because we're going to be changing it. And that's it. So we'll go replace and at param vector int, and then we get rid of that p and ampersand. So vector in question. I don't know. I'm just as I say, I'm always making this up. You're supposed to do this. Take this seriously. All the comments. I'm telling you, take these seriously. It's very important. But I'm pressed on time, and you know what I'm doing anyways. So I already explained it to you. So the comments aren't as important for me right now. So void and what was it called? Replace. And all we're doing is passing this in. So I'll just copy this without the constant, since we didn't declare as a constant. So we'll have an int. We're gonna have 2. We'll have int old and replace. That's what I'll call them. So that's 2 different integers. I'll just declare them both right there. And I'll have a cout that will print out that says type in a number to search for, and 1 to, how about this? Type in a number to be replaced with another number. So type in a number to be replaced with another number, or I don't know, I'm not wording this properly, but basically type in 2. So first we're going to type in the number that we want to have replaced, so we'll type old first, and then we'll type in the number to replace it with. So now we're going to just go through our for loop again. So for unsigned int I is equal to 0, I is less than new my vector dot size I plus plus. There we go. And now we're gonna have an if statement in here. See, now we're really doing everything. We're doing vectors, we're doing functions, we're doing loops, we're doing if statements. This really builds on everything, doesn't it? But anyway, so if new my vector at I is equal to the old, then what you're going to do is go new my vector at that specific location, set it equal to the replace value. And that is it. That is all she wrote. So I'll click save, and let's run this. So first of all, let me have an end line here. I just want to really make sure all this. I think it'll be a double end line here, but oh well. I really want to make sure it works out. So I'll run this and let's check it out. Oh wait, I didn't implement it. Sorry. To go back up here and type in replace and throw in my vector. Click save and let's run this. So I'll just type in a bunch of numbers. -1. There we go. Only the evens are printed. So type in a number to be replaced with another number. So what number do we want to replace? Let's replace these 6s. So we have 3 6s right here. Let's replace them, shall we? So we want to replace the 6s, and let's replace them with 9s. We don't have any 9s in there at all. I click enter, and oh darn, it did not print it. So sorry about that. Let me go down here, and you know what? I'm gonna call the vector now. Okay, I'm gonna call the print function. So I'm gonna go print vector and pass in my vector right here. There we go. Sorry about that. Didn't print it. So press F5, and now let's do this again. So there you go. So now let's replace these 6s again, and I have no 9s. So 6, 9, and boom. So the first 6 right there got replaced to a 9, and both these 6s both were changed to 9s. So there we go. So that's about all I wanted to show you in this tutorial. I hope these 3 little functions here were helpful, and I hope this whole tutorial was helpful for you. It's quite a bit of stuff, and yeah, I really hope you learned a lot. So I'll see you next time, and I believe we're going to be going into object-oriented programming, the heart of C++.